Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today's Progress Semaphore webinar, Building Knowledge Graphs to Power Your AI Initiatives, Unlocking Data Connections for Smarter AI, Better Insights, and Scalable Innovation. Joining me today will be Stephen Reed, Senior Account Manager, and Jim Morris, Principal Engineer. They'll be taking you through today's demos and presentations. And so, without further ado, let me hand you over to Stephen now. Stephen, it's over to you.
Thank you, Philip. Appreciate that. Again, my name is Stephen Reed. I'm a senior account executive here at Progress Software. Before we get into the meat of knowledge graphs and knowledge modeling, I'm going to take a couple of minutes up front just to kind of set the framework for today's conversation. I'm going to be taking a little bit take a look at a little bit of the traditional approach to AI, some of the limitations to that approach, and then how we can use knowledge graphs and knowledge modeling to strengthen those AI initiatives. And then I'll be turning things over to my colleague, Jim, for a live demonstration. And then at the end, we'll have some Q&A as well. So if you think about it for a moment, what's the real difference between an AI initiative at company A versus company B? Because if you think about the tools that are out there, the chat GPTs, the Copilots, the Groks, all those, they're kind of accessible to anyone. So it's kind of like a level playing field from that perspective. Really what makes these projects different is how companies are integrating their private data with it. And that's really where the success of the generative AI projects are coming from, is being able to leverage private data effectively with my Gen AI tools. So why, therefore, are these projects so hard? Why are so many companies struggling to get the most out of their private data with their Gen AI initiatives? Well, there's a lot of reasons for this, but the way that I like to think about it, or the example that I like to think about it is, let's say, for example, I came to work for your company tomorrow. Well, how did I get to work for your company? Well, I probably went through an interviewing process, and we were able to have that interviewing process because we both spoke the same language, English. But once I started working for you, you're going to have to train me on all the acronyms that you use. I'm going to have to learn about all your different customers. I'm going to have to learn about all your different policies and procedures. I don't know any of that. You're going to have to teach me that information. Well, the Gen AIs of the world, they're absolutely no different. They don't have any understanding of any of those things too in your organization. So they don't know how to process your private data. So we have to figure out a way, well, how can we help them? How can we do that? If you think for a moment, though, and just take a quick step back, how the basic generative AI architecture work, it kind of looks like this. And you're probably all familiar with playing around with various tools yourselves, is you ask the Gen AI a question and it gives you a response back. And what I've found is, they're pretty good, I'll say, on things that are commonly known, kind of open source information. But once you start asking about anything around private data, these models start falling down really quickly, and you don't really get the right answers that you're looking for. Additionally, kind of these out-of-the-box generative AI tools have a lot of kind of built-in issues as well, too. Hallucinations is probably my favorite one. I think it's very industry that we as an industry had to come up with a term for that, because what is really hallucination? A hallucination is really just a really convincing wrong answer. That's really what a hallucination is. And we'll have an example of that in just a moment. But you have all these other issues as well, too, with out-of-the-box LMs. Data biases, understanding data cutoffs, meaning I just am not getting the right information or don't have access to the right information in order to answer the questions. Explainability and robustness. And robustness really means did I really understand the question that's being asked? And the reality is, all these things can be either fixed or mitigated with the proper usage of private data. And that's really what we're talking about today, and how knowledge graphs and knowledge models can help that. But before getting into that, I wanted to do a quick example of a ChatGPT hallucination. This actually happened to me a couple weeks ago. Now, the body of the email is fabricated, the email address is fabricated, but the heart is really the same, which is someone sent me a note and said, "Hey, Stephen, can you please give me a call?" But they gave me an incomplete phone number. Now, I'd been in conversations with this person before, and I knew they were outside of the Denver, Colorado area. So I was trying to be a, quote unquote good person, not respond back and say, "Hey, you guys, you sent me a bad phone number." I said, "You know what? this would probably be a great task for a chat GPT of the world to be able to answer, because how many area codes could there possibly be in Colorado that ends in the digits 08? So I asked that question. ChatGPT happily gives me a response and says the only area code in Denver, Colorado that ends in 08 is 720. And it goes on and provides me a very detailed explanation of all the area codes in Denver and reinforces the fact that the answer is area code 720. Well, that's obviously wrong. So the point is, even these quote unquote out of the box LLMs don't get it right all the time. And one way that can help them get it right is by feeding it the right information up front in order to make the best answer. So how do I improve the answers that I'm getting from my LLM models? Well, there's one of two ways to do it. I can either train my LLM models on my private data, or I can use an architecture called retrieval-augmented generation, or RAG. If you train your own models, it's typically very costly, very time consuming. And then as soon as you're done training it, any net new information is, of course, not available to the LLM. So you don't have the relevance, or you don't have the most timely data at any given time if you take that path. Conversely, if you go down the RAG path, you can always send it the most relevant data, assuming that you can find it quickly and accurately. And RAG takes advantage of something called the token window. So the token window is more commonly known as the concept of prompt engineering. So this is when you're typing in all your information to the chat GPT or the Groks of the world and say, hey, I want you to respond to this question using this type of writing style, blah, blah, blah. That's your kind of your prompt window or your token window. Now, when you're doing that on the back end, what's happening is the computer's converting basically your text into a string of digits or tokens. And those tokens may or may not have an exact one-to-one mapping between words, but you can kind of think of it, there's, each word that you're typing is being converted into a numerical value. And those tokens is actually what's being sent to the Gen AI as part of the prompt window. Now, depending on what LLM you're using, these token windows can be of various sizes. But there's a couple things to remember. None of them are infinitely large, so they're all finite. So I can't, send all my information, all my private data to the token windows for processing. And the other thing that we have to recall too, or keep in mind, is that the amount of information I send in these token windows is directly proportional to the cost and processing and response time of the LLMs. So even if I did have an infinitely large token window, it would be impractical to use because I'd be basically waiting forever in order to get a response. So really, what I'm trying to do with this prompt engineering through these token windows is not sending all the data. I want to just send the right data to the LLM to give me the best response. So then the question becomes, how do I find the right data to send? Well, that's where knowledge graphs really can help us solve this problem. All right. And knowledge graphs, you can kind of think of them as two pieces. One is basically a data index, where it's basically a way to represent or reference all the private data you have within your organization. And then you basically have a taxonomy or knowledge model that basically describes the relationships of that data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that before we get into Jim's demonstration. But basically, that's step one of the process. I need to have a graph representation of my private data. And that allows me to be able to understand it so that when someone comes along with a user query and says, hey, I want to be able to answer this question, I can quickly search that graph database and say, hey, what's the most relevant private data that I have that I can then send to the generative AI inside the token window to provide me with the best response. And when you do that, we're seeing very, very high results in accuracy with these private data approaches using a graph RAG architecture. So we're really going to be focused for the rest of the time today on this box here, Semaphore. Semaphore is our taxonomy / knowledge modeling tool. It describes the relationships that I have in my private data. And we're going to talk about just a couple terms first, and then I'll be turning things over to Jim for a live demonstration. So first of all, let's talk about, well, what actually is a knowledge graph? Well, if you think about the data that you have right now, a lot of people think about this term data silos, meaning I have isolated and independent data. And that can happen over time. It can happen through acquisitions. It can happen because of every time I spring up a new application, I may need a new data repository, a type of data to support that. So I don't really have a good way of connecting that data. What a graph does is it allows us to connect the data across my data silos. So the example that I always give here is I say, how many ways can you think about the concept or the data idea of a social security number, right? It might be stored as employee identification number in one database. It might be taxpayer identification number in another database. And inside my employee resources file, it could be social security number. But it's all talking about the same concept. They're all semantically linked, meaning they have the same semantic meaning. So then how are these relationships described in these different data silos once we connect them together? Those relationships are defined by a taxonomy or a knowledge model. So that begs the question then, well, what is a taxonomy or a knowledge model? You don't have to overthink it too much, but basically a taxonomy or knowledge model is just a way to group information so it's in a logical category and can be easily referenced, searched, potentially even distributed. So my favorite example here is the next time you walk into a grocery store, you're actually walking into a taxonomy. Okay, there is a reason grocery stores don't sort their food or itemize their food alphabetically. That wouldn't make any sense, right? You're not going to find a steak in the same aisle as you would as a can of soup, right? They have departments, produce, meat, dry goods, because that is a logical way and makes sense in the terms of a grocery store of how to organize information. So once I basically have a way to describe the relationships between my various data, I have a way to basically index that data and make those relationships known through a knowledge model. Then basically I have the core pieces of what I need to construct a knowledge graph. Now, this is a little bit more sophisticated version. You can kind of see, oh, I have much more, I'll say much more flushed out concepts, but then you also see that I have the relationships between these concepts analyzed as well too. So I have a way of representing not only what the data item is, but how it's related to other things in my organization or how it's related to potentially other data repositories as well too. So that's kind of a working definition that we have for knowledge graph, for taxonomy, and for knowledge models. And from here, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Jim, who's going to give a little bit more of a live demonstration and show how we can actually build one of these things in practice.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so we're going to take a closer look at how our platform supports the ideas that Stephen was just presenting. The idea that knowledge graphs are essential to making AI trustworthy, and how knowledge models or knowledge modeling is essential to making knowledge graphs trustworthy, because that's where the proprietary establishments or relationships and ideas are formed and validated. Okay, so what we're going to do today, we're going to walk through a set of demonstrations, and we're really going to talk about how, with RAG solutions that Stephen spent a lot of time describing how they work and how our solution works, let's look at a little more detail about why the problems with trying to use them without a knowledge graph, without some type of representation of your domain. And even more specifically, we're going to talk about how the knowledge model drives the knowledge graph, and how the knowledge model, unlike a knowledge graph, which can have a lot of data connected through the knowledge model is really something very specific and curated and deliberately managed by subject matter experts or taxonomists or people in your organization that specialize in that. But we want to talk about how we're getting information from sources that already exist, because that's a question we get all the time, and it's a fair question. Okay, I know I need a knowledge model. You've convinced me. Where am I going to get it? And the answer is the data is basically everywhere. People do all day is work with knowledge and express it in terminology and the systems that they're using. So let's look at an example of that, specifically in the context of RAG. So they're using a RAG solution. How do we collect information from that very process to help develop our model? And then within Semaphore itself, we have a lot of tools for enriching models. We recognize the importance of subject matter experts managing these models. but we try to provide as many tools as we can to support them. Some of them using AI itself, some of them integrating the models with your documents, and a lot of other tools. So we're going to look at a couple of those. Finally, we're going to talk about how databases in your organization, spreadsheets that people use, these are all fantastic sources of terminology. It doesn't have to be a completed knowledge model to be a good source of information. And websites themselves are good. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And that'll be a point where we can go to, well, how does this all fit together in the context of knowledge models and documents and user experience to show the knowledge graph in kind of a bigger picture with a solution that we're building here at Progress. So in other words, if we talk about a knowledge graph again, where does it come from? Well, it comes from everywhere. Information is, and data that can form a knowledge graph is all over your organization, in databases of products and projects, in your documents themselves. Lots of data that may or may not have connections to each other. And then you've got your knowledge model, what we're calling a knowledge model. You could think of it as an ontology or a taxonomy. And that is what enables the graph and provides that layer that can be validated by subject matter experts, and knowledge workers can actively contribute to it so that it accurately reflects a particular domain that's important to your business. But to do this, we need the right tools. So that's what Semaphore and the Progress platform is all about. So this first example I want to walk through is going back to the RAG architecture, where we're providing a interface to information related to, in this case, it's related to benefits, medical benefits, and those that are covered by Medicare in this case. And we're going to look at an example of how it works without the support of a knowledge graph and how it would work with the support of a knowledge graph. So this is a demonstration platform of the Progress Data Platform RAG solution. And we've implemented this at a few clients very successfully, and we're continuing to build on it. But I want to use this as an example to show a couple scenarios here. So suppose I've got an ant, and this first example is more focusing kind of outward toward the public perhaps, and we want to support the public's queries with the knowledge graph or the knowledge model. Suppose I have an ant and they're going into a skilled nursing facility, and I might want to know, will her diabetes medicines be covered? And I'm going to try to be clever here, and I'm just going to use an abbreviation SNF for skilled nursing facility. So we're going to ask the LLM this question through our RAG solution and directly through. So we get both fairly correct responses, but the one going directly to the AI with no intervention is a little unsure. But it does know what SNF means. So, you know, the AIs are very smart. They're going to know a lot of terminology. They're going to know a lot of abbreviations that we don't necessarily need to replicate in our internal systems. We really want the knowledge model to be focused on information that is specific to your business or specific to the domain that you're trying to support. So, for example, I live in Rochester, New York, and there's a facility nearby called Penfield Place, and it is a skilled nursing facility, but that's kind of an obscure fact on the internet. And the AI itself that we're talking to on the left here, it's learning every day. So, but what I'm expecting here is that it will be unsure of the answer. And why is that? Well, because it doesn't have the association between Penfield Place and a skilled nursing facility. But I manage that information in a knowledge graph, specifically a knowledge model where I can manage this information. I can say, I'm managing skilled nursing facilities, and I keep a record of the different institutions that fall into that category. And this is something actually our clients do. It's a good example of how they cover stories in the news and new updates to standards of care. They keep track of specific institutions and their categories actually in Semaphore. So it's a good use case. So we'll look at this model in a second, that's facilitating the response to this question. But I want to use one more example where I might throw something at it that it doesn't recognize. So I don't know if you're familiar with immunoglobulin therapy. It's a therapy for people with compromised immune systems. So it's a kind of a very specific system, very specific type of question about a condition. I'm going to use its abbreviation IVIG, which is a common abbreviation for if you're familiar with that concept. So there won't be too many surprises here. And does Medicare cover things as something that's published on the internet? So it gives a pretty good response. It's pretty confident. It may cover it, and then there's some disclaimers about it. Whereas the solution where we're actually referencing a knowledge graph is very specific because it knows for absolute sure what IVIG means. And we have documents in our collection that specifically state this. So the AI was very easily able to be directed to the documents that answer this question. But let's say we're inside of a company and we're working on our intranet. And I just heard of a product, say that there's a pharmaceutical company that I own, and it's called JRM, and my initials. And suppose something just came out like JRM 0005 I heard about. Now, what is that all about? So if I submit that for an answer, that you get a couple different responses, but both are unsure. The RAG solution is specifically unsure because you didn't provide me documents with this answer. So that's why it didn't respond. So now what do we do? So now we're talking about how the knowledge model is managed and automatically can kind of self-heal, if you will, as it interacts with clients. Because what we're getting at here is knowledge models can come from many different sources. And we're going to walk through a few of them today. So the first thing we're going to look at, well, things like this, these are people interacting with information. And if they say something that we're not familiar with that's not in the knowledge model, let's capture that and add it. Okay, so this is the opportunity to take a look at that knowledge model that's enabling this. So we're going to go to Progress Data Cloud. This is our fairly recently launched cloud service. It's the successor to Semaphore Cloud, which has been around for many years. But now we have a much more richer experience. And you can have multiple environments. So I'm just going to quickly go into the particular environment that is behind this particular solution. And I'm going to go into that particular model. And getting back to that first example about Pempfield Place, you can see I actually have a concept for that. And I've indicated that that is a skilled nursing facility. If you look at the model here. So that's how that solution worked. I had this specifically modeled where my providers are categorized by the type of facility. And then I can use that to support the retrieval of information through the RAG solution. But now that JRM 005, what was that about? So I have a special view of this model that is set up to receive feedback from the users. So here, if you can see this, I've got on the left what we call the knowledge review tool, where this is set up specifically to pull in information from other sources. We have many different ways to do this. In this case, we're tying it into that RAG search window, and it can be tied into any search box or any interaction with information that people have, and then the information can be pulled back into Semaphore if it's a term we don't recognize. So I see we have a new concept here. And Semaphore has the workflow to support assessing this. So I can say, oh, this is a new concept. And the idea is I'm a subject matter. Now I'm the knowledge worker. I'm the editor of these knowledge models. So you see what we're getting at here, where we're getting information from the field, from people, where people are actually working. We're bringing it back into the tool, but we're not forgetting the fact that these knowledge models need to be validated, and they need to be correct and trustworthy. We're trying to build a trustworthy AI, and for that, the subject matter experts need to validate that the information we're using is correct. So I'm getting these requests back, and I can say, all right, I'm not sure what this is. Notice the request comes in even with the question, will Medicare cover JRM at 005? That's exactly what I asked on the interface before, and that is what's coming back. So I've got a little bit of help here, but I can get additional help. I have access to a number of model enrichment capabilities here inside of Semaphore, and one of them is specifically designed to look at my internal content and understand a little bit more about the concepts that I'm working with. So for example, in this case, do I have any information about this JRM 0005? Apparently the RAG solution didn't know about it, but maybe I have some additional information. Maybe I'm looking at a broader set of data. So if I analyze this, I see, oh, a document actually has been pushed out, actually has been published internally about this topic. And now I can see that JRM 005 has just entered phase 1 trial. So it's a brand new type of concept that's being more popular because we're moving into clinical trials. And it is a treatment for compromised immune system, specifically that IVIG treatment that we looked at before. So now I know what it is. So I can actually take some of this information and I can say, okay, well, let's make sure that this is added as an additional label for this product so that I can align the new concept with the topic that we know that it's about. So I've added that as a synonym. Now I can accept this. I need to put it somewhere in the taxonomy. I happen to have a special product taxonomy set up for my business, and this is typical. I work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and they have taxonomies of competitors, and they have taxonomies of their products. So it makes sense that I would have a separate branch for my product. So I'm going to put it in there. And that's it in terms of validating that information. I've collected it from the user, directly from somebody trying to find this information. I've captured it, I've validated it, and I'm going to push this back out into the wild here. So it's accessible to systems like the RAG interface we're looking at. So this gets published. I'm going to go back to my solution here. Let's just make sure we haven't timed out. So I'm going to refresh, and let's ask that question again. And so now we can see it knows that JRM 005 is a type of IVIG treatment, and I know what the answer to IVIG treatments are. So I can actually provide the response to the user, whereas before I couldn't. And just going directly to the internet still is does not provide the answer, because obviously it doesn't know anything about this proprietary terminology. So this is a really good use case here, where we're talking about modeling your internal concepts that is not known by the internet. So the LLM is not going to be trained on it. And just as importantly, it's not known in this collection of documents that are the target of this RAG solution. So in a lot of cases, people want to take their internal documents, and this is not a bad approach. This is a good approach. Take a lot of internal documents, mine them, pull out these entities, and we do this with Semaphore as well. But you're only using data that's in the documents. There's information that is not necessarily in those documents that needs to be modeled as well. Okay, so I want to look at a couple other examples of how Semaphore supports the development, the management of knowledge models, so that they can be trustworthy and they can be used to drive the development of knowledge graphs, in turn, and present and create trustworthy AI solutions. So I'm going to go to that model again. And for this, I'm using the Semaphore Innovation Release because it has a few different capabilities in it. So let's look at a particular subject in this model. And let's look at diabetes since we're kind of on, we were on that topic earlier. One of the first things I want to show you is, again, these side panels on the right are designed for the subject matter expert or the knowledge worker here to rapidly understand concepts and make improvements to them. We have things like this lexical side panel that has that is a clustering of concepts that it's mined from the internet. We've had this for a while, and it is a great tool at exposing some of the other types of terminology that might be useful, even misspellings and things like that that are useful for adding to a concept. But there's a couple other capabilities we have as well. So just before we looked at the text analytics side panel, that was one way to look at internal documents. I've got another one here called the text mining side panel. And this goes even deeper into the analysis of the content and looks for co-occurrence of how this concept has been used in a corpus, and we can compare it against other concepts. And that can be a great way to develop the model. So for example, I can look at what mined phrases, so brand new terminology that may or may not be in my model from my corpus against concepts that I have used. So we can see we're looking at co-occurrence of subject terms that have been used to classify content against noun phrases that may be novel that have been mined from the corpus. This is a really valuable way to find out what terminology may be useful in developing my knowledge models because we're getting them from the documents. So things like blood glucose, that may actually be a good, maybe not it's actually a synonym, but we could use that as a signpost term, which means that if you see blood glucose as a concept, as a term in a document, it could have something to do with diabetes. So consider it as evidence, if you will. So we can do a lot of this type of information. Again, that if this was purely left up to the machine, we would get some spurious information like author information. This happens to be a corpus that involves a lot of published articles. So it has author information, which is not relevant to diabetes, even though it co-occurs a lot with the topic. So it's presented here because the machine is making the decision. We need the subject matter expert to say, is that correct? Because if you just automatically generated your graph, you get a lot of different information here that would be irrelevant and would misguide your AI. So that's why it has to be a tool that the subject matter experts can validate. Let's look at one of our most exciting features that we've added to Semaphore, and that is our AI model builder. So we are at Progress and at Semaphore, we are using AI in as many ways as we possibly can. We recognize the value of it, of course, and we use them in the context of building knowledge models that keep the subject matter expert in the loop and validating the information. So if I'm looking at diabetes, suppose I want to build up my taxonomy a bit more. I don't have a complete view of this concept. I can use the AI to do that. So I can say here, either I can suggest labels or narrower concepts. Let's look at narrower concepts. And I bring up this panel, and if I just hit get suggestions, I'll get back a set of lower level terms. So interesting, it brings back a set of terms that look pretty good. I can add them to my concept, or I can maybe ask for a bit more. I can also go back and get a separate set of suggestions if these are not what I'm looking at, what I'm looking for. I can be more specific. There's special advanced capabilities here. I could say, only provide diseases, please, not things like therapy and stuff like that. So if I send that with my context and that's important. I'm sending a lot of context about the model. So because I could bring up another window in ChatGPT and say, hey, give me some narrower concept of diabetes. We all know that that's possible, but we're not sending the context of the model itself. We're not bringing back the information in a form that can be immediately added to my model. So now you can see I've added a whole set of narrower concepts here. I can also ask for additional labels. Let's just get some more terminology for diabetes that might be useful. I've got some, it's because it knows the structure of the model. It's finding abbreviations, acronyms. It's even giving some examples, all kinds of different ways to look at it by using the model structure to provide this information. Maybe some of this is useful, maybe some of it isn't. I'll just select some of it and add it. So you can see it goes right into the model as alternate labels. And now I've got this additional information in my model. So you can see what's going on here. We've got a knowledge model, a subject matter expert validated knowledge model that is driving the utility of AI solutions in my business. But I'm also connecting it to the AI to manage and develop the model itself. And I can do that in a variety of ways. We're continuing to add those features to it. And we saw earlier that we're actually connecting the model to the documents themselves. So then you start to see this network that we saw before. We're actually using the knowledge graph to get additional information out of documents to help build the graph. Now, there's also information in databases, and we didn't talk much about that, but just as an example, there's information all over your business about your products, about your projects, key information, much of it proprietary to your internal domains and expertise. So those are the really important pieces to pull out and add into your knowledge models, because that is essential to give the context to the AI that's relevant to you and your business. So just as a quick example, I developed a model related to healthcare codes, and there's lots of information about that on the internet. So here's a set of hospital procedure codes, et cetera, that I was able to pull in, and very quickly I was able to build a knowledge model about that information. So now I have a little code lookup tool. Again, it's using Semaphore to do this. And I can explore additional information about this topic. All created from a spreadsheet and merged together in one large model that aggregated multiple sources together. So we've talked about databases, and that's just one example. There's information all over your organization that can be used for this. And again, one database may not be the complete knowledge model that you need. You're going to get it from different points, and then make and then assess how they might be combined into one larger model. Another kind of unexpected but great source of information about knowledge models is your website. This could be an intranet website, internal, or it could be external. Working with a client recently, we were talking about the knowledge models and where they were going to come from. And I went out to their product catalog on the internet, and it had this fantastic organization, like 3 levels of hierarchy and categorizations of all their products. They have a zillion products, and it was a great source of it. And they were able to go to the manager of the website, say, hey, can I have that data? And sure enough, it was very easy to provide. So somebody had already gone through the trouble of thinking about how to organize that information. And you can make use of it as information that's already been validated in your solution. to help drive connections between the data itself that's in your systems. So for example, even Progress software does this, of course. So if we actually go to the Progress website, we go to products. Oh, look, here's what, maybe not everybody looks at things this way, but I look at it this way. Look, a taxonomy. It's just like a Stevens supermarket. I can wander around and find things according to these categories. If I go to my our flagship product OpenEdge database, I can see more information about that. Here's another set of categories, headings and details. All this can be information that drives the development of knowledge models that in turn make your knowledge graph and your AI solutions trustworthy. Now we've done some development here, and we've got an exciting new tool that we've developed where we've taken some of the support tickets for OpenEdge and put them into a tool that uses those documents and leverages AI to provide a useful experience for finding and using a graph to help understand the support tickets for our products. It uses a number of Progress technologies between classification, Mark Logic is storing the data, and we have some of our visualization capabilities adding richness to the experience. So for example, I just wanted to show one aspect of this. The graph, we've been looking at these graphs in Semaphore, including some of the visualization capabilities of Semaphore. But we can also look at a kind of a larger view of the graph and do some graph analytics. Again, this is a visualization tool that Progress provides. And actually, it's all breaking down all the little topics that we've come up with regarding that might be raised in our ticketing system. And I can start to click through these. And on the right, you'll see as I click through the graph and I start building it, I'm getting results back that correspond to the graph that I'm building. So I can start to explore how the graph relates to the content. So you can see I'm building out the graph further as I explore it, and then looking at the documents that are associated with these categories. I can also do graph analysis, like look at, well, how far away are two concepts together in the graph, and that can be an indication as to how important they are to each other. And if I start including the documents, this is really important, not including the documents as nodes in the graph. Then I can see connections between concepts that are co-occurring in the documents, just like we saw on that side panel inside of Semaphore. We're looking at all this analysis of the concepts as they occur in the documents, as they occur when people search for information, and we're pulling that back into a graph that can be validated by subject matter experts and say, yes, this is the truth. This represents our world. You can trust it, and you can use it to add trustworthiness to your graphs and to your search systems, really any system. But we're really focusing on AI because of all the issues that Stephen raised earlier about. You have to add the trustworthiness. You have to add the deterministic nature of your knowledge that you're aware of to the more probabilistic and risky uses of AI. So we've looked at a number of solutions here about how we're integrating knowledge models and knowledge graphs into information solutions, how we're collecting information from all over your organization through various means, various interfaces back into the tool that we use, Semaphore, to produce these knowledge models that can be used to drive your AI initiatives. So with that, I'll send it back to Phil. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, for that. There we go. Really, really interesting, and thank you both, Stephen and Jim, for that demonstration and that presentation. essentially what we're talking about here is retrieval augmented generation with knowledge graphs. The ability to scale and provide the language of your business, the domain in which your business exists, and therefore the language that surrounds your data, and being able to build these and manage these efficiently. We're able to easily update and enrich these knowledge graphs with new concepts. Importantly, for regulatory purposes, legislative purposes, and for compliance purposes, we're providing that human in the loop at a machine scale to provide better accuracy. And we're consistently retrieving fact-based information with fewer hallucinations. We've already done this in a number of customers, and we're really interested to explore kind of where the technology goes next. We've got more features and functions coming to this kind of all the time at the moment. But again, use this opportunity, this forum here, to suggest things that you would like to see in the tool in the future. But with that, let's get to some of the questions that we had. Oh, before that, sorry. If you want to check out what's new, sorry, with all the stuff that's coming through, then scan the QR code on this page. It will take you to the what's new page on progress.com and under our Semaphore section, and you can look at all the latest innovation, including those side panel widgets that Jim went through there. It's like I say, it's a really exciting time for our product and engineering teams here to be working with customers on some of these really innovative solutions. So now let's go to the Q&A. You can tell it's live. There we go. Jim and Steve, if you could turn on your cameras and microphones and join me, that would be great. I think we've already got some questions from the audience there. So let's have a look here. Where is my? There we go. There we go. Perfect. Both of you there. Right. Well, again, thank you, gentlemen, for presenting today. It's a really interesting topic. I can tell by the number of people that have joined us live today. Like I say, we have got some questions from the audience, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can today. First and foremost, will we get the slides and a video after the presentation? An on-demand link to the presentation will be sent to everybody that's registered. So even if you couldn't make it live today, you could send that to colleagues, or you'll get that yourself. And we'll try and find a way of getting the presentation out to you as well, if you find that useful. I know there's some really good information in there, and thanks very much to Steve and Jim for putting that together for us. I've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, so let's start off with those. I've got, are you using linked data for your concepts, Stephen? Do you mind taking that one?
If I'm following that question correctly, I'll slightly paraphrase it, and Jim, maybe you can keep me out of trouble. So let's go under the covers of Semaphore as a SCOS model, if you're familiar with SCOS. So that's how things are being represented. What we try to do with Semaphore, though, is make it really, hopefully you got the idea, is a fairly user-friendly interface. You don't have to be a deep taxonomist, ontologist to use Semaphore. Really, the intent is to put the power of Semaphore in the hand of the subject matter expert, so they can build these models over time. But on the back end, it's being stored as SCOS.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really interesting, the note you made there. That UI is really intuitive. I remember when I first saw or heard about Semaphore, I was like, I don't really get it. As soon as I saw that UI, it really crystallized in my mind. Okay, I understand what this tool is now, and kind of how that would work in the business world. So yeah, fantastic tool.
Yeah, and I would look at, there's a lot of other webinars and other little short videos that talk a little more detail about the interface itself. I certainly didn't go into much detail here, but to kind of show that usability. And underneath it is a linked data platform. It is using a RDF standard for its data.
And so I'll keep with you, Jim. How do you include a Semaphore concept in the AI prompt so the AI properly interprets it?
Yeah, it's all done through the APIs. All of Semaphore's components have APIs, and it's actually calling Semaphore. It's taking the question is being sent to Semaphore, and Semaphore is responding with, I know these concepts that are in this question. Let me give you a little kind of a snippet of the graph, kind of that comes from that part of the model, and that gets included in with the prompt to the AI. And it also drives the search of the documents itself. So it's using it in two ways.
Yeah, so we use for the search component underneath Semaphore is part of the other part of our data platform, MarkLogic, and that will help when you're driving across that graph and trying to kind of extract the relevant paragraph or the documentation and things like that. What's really interesting, it doesn't just give you like, oh, here it is in this 1,000-page document. Good luck. I'll see if you can find the answer. It will get down to the sentence level, to the paragraphs level on the page, and it will give that in the validation of the response back from the LLM. So question here for me. So it looks like we've got some people interested in bioinformatics, dealing with hundreds and thousands of genes, and they'd like us to get in touch. So I'll definitely be passing that to the team there. It's kind of a perfect use case in our world there, because there's lots of taxonomies and ontologies already available for that type of thing, and all we've just got to do is bring that to bear against your data. So there. Sticking with Jim, where are those side panels coming from? Can we install them somehow? Example, the text analytics and Wikipedia one. So it looks like we've already got a user of Semaphore that wants to kind of expand their use of that.
Sure, yeah, all those are available. Some of them come with Semaphore, the lexical side panel you're probably familiar with already, and some of the other ones that are on there. The text analytics side panels out of the box with Semaphore. The text mining is an add-on, so we can talk about how you would get that one. That uses a database, a MarkLogic database on the back end to facilitate that co-occurrence analysis. But yeah, we can talk more about how to get that. The Wikipedia one is just one that we built. There's no license for that. We can share how that is configured.
Right.
And it's kind of it's an example of how you can build your own side panels. I mean, you know, we're just passing information from the model to some application, which is then displaying data in a way that is formatted for that panel. It's an open framework. It's actually on our GitHub site. It talks more about how you would build those side panels yourself. So yeah, the idea of tapping into other databases, you know, that's what part of that side panel that we didn't talk about much. With the text mining side panel is showing like how many documents were tagged with this concept, and to what degree, and what evidence was used to tag that concept. Some very kind of nuanced way to explore how effective a Semaphore model is. And but again, it's just tapping into a database and displaying that information on the side. You can think of other ways you could do that to understand more about how your model is connecting to your data.
Well, congratulations, Jim. That sounds like you volunteer for the next webinar, which will be how to build side panels.
Right.
Since what version of KMM is AI available? Also, if it supports other languages. Stephen, maybe you can take that one.
Yes, so the platform that Jim showed in his demo today was actually Semaphore 5.10. It's called an innovation release, which means it's the cool and latest features that we're currently offering in the product. We have now innovation and long-term supported releases. The innovation releases tend to be short-lived, so we'll eventually publish out a long-term supported release that will include those features. But so long as you're aware of the limitations of the innovation releases, you're free to use them in your environment. Yeah, Jim, was there anything else? Do we have an LTS release date on AI Builder yet, or I don't know if that's with
5.12 due out this year. I don't know if I can be more specific than that, but yeah, that will include those innovations. And it does support other languages. That was the other part of that question. If I had other languages enabled in that model, it could also return terms in whatever language I have configured.
Yeah, there's a great demo of somebody showing that where we had one of our colleagues going on maternity leave in Bulgaria, and the documentation we had was in Bulgarian, but we asked it in English questions like, "What's the policy in Bulgaria?" And it came back with an English answer, which I thought was really cool. On this demo, are we using relationships in MarkLogic or only those created in Semaphore?
I guess I'll start there, and Jim, you maybe can, because I know you did a lot of the back end stuff on the demo. So Semaphore and MarkLogic are sister technologies, and more so, you can actually store the SCOS model that Semaphore uses in the interface inside of MarkLogic. So the answer is kind of yes. It's both, right? So yeah. Semaphore can use a standalone model. It can also use models inside of use MarkLogic as its data store as well too. It just really depends on your use case and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and that last picture we saw when we were looking at that support ticket demonstration, you were looking at data from both places. So the Semaphore model was accessible as well as data that was stored in MarkLogic. Yeah, it's a perfect combination of technologies between documents, other data, Semaphore controlled models, all working together to provide insights.
And Stephen, one of the questions was asked, do we have a Confluence crawler?
Oh yeah, so we often get questions like, oh, do you integrate with content management system X or search engine Y? And we kind of made a decision a couple of years ago that instead of trying to support every product on the market, that we were just going to put a lot of R&D effort into developing really good APIs. So when someone asks, oh, how do you integrate with Confluence? Those would be through our APIs. Now, clients will use things like NiFi and things like that to facilitate the integration. But generally speaking, 99% of the time when we do any type of integrations through our API, the one notable exception that is SharePoint. We do have a plugin for SharePoint, but basically all the other technologies, if you're trying to integrate them with a content management or search system or knowledge graph, it will be done through our APIs.
Yeah. And is there any pre-work done to pull in FIBO ontology models for financial services with Semaphore? Jim, maybe you can take that one.
Yeah, we've certainly done that. We have a particular version of the FIBO ontology that's been kind of vocabularized, I guess, for presentation as a taxonomy, because the FIBO ontology is really, it's kind of a data model for controlling how data is transmitted and integrated across financial institutions, I guess. And I think putting that into something that is, again, subject matter expert, viewable, and understandable is the work that's done to have that be useful inside of Semaphore. So yeah, get in touch with us and we can talk more about our relationship with FIBO. Yeah. We have a lot of financial services clients.
Yeah. We're coming up to the top of the hour. We've only got a few more questions, so we might run slightly over. So if you've got to leave us, that's fine. But we'll put it in the on-demand recording for you. So we'll try and race through these. Will Semaphore support LPG with emphasis on relationship? Jim, maybe you can take that one.
Labeled property graphs. Yeah. We, as I gave away before, we are an RDF database under the hood, and that's what we use. But we are SCOS based, if you know what that is. So it's a particular data format using RDF. But we have extended our RDF data to include the ability to put properties on relationships. So it's kind of a nice feature, certainly not in scope for this webinar, but we would love to talk to you more about how we handle relationship properties on relationships like an LPG would.
Yeah. And thanks for the impressive demo. First intro into Semaphore, so apologies if it's a stupid question. There are no stupid questions when it comes to this, only stupid answers, right? So hopefully we'll give you a good answer. But what APIs are available to questions/responses can be integrated? Sorry, are there APIs available? I think that Stephen's already kind of covered this, to integrate into custom applications, so ones that you're building yourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of as I was talking before, we just kind of made the, again, architectural decision. Instead of trying to support every product on the face of the planet, we're just going to have really solid APIs so that customers can plug whatever they want into our application and get the results that they need through our API toolkit.
Yeah, we have a number of toolkits as well that kind of facilitate the use of those APIs. We have like a NiFi connector. We have a Blue Prism and RPG, robotic process, whatever that term is. Yes. We support a number of those, and we have little Java apps that facilitate using the APIs as well. So you're intended to make use of them.
And how would one approach modeling like a large relational data store, like an ERP, for instance, then? Maybe Jim, if you can take that one.
Well, you're doing a knowledge model, so you're not using all the relational data. You'd be looking for the concepts that are in that relational data store that would model the key relationships between concepts that are built into that relational model, and that would help that relational model maybe integrate with other relational models. You would manage those types of concepts and relationships inside of Semaphore to facilitate the integration of data into a graph, perhaps, or just any other type of integration.
Yeah.
There's just a thought on that one too. There's no limitation to what you can model inside of Semaphore. If you want to model your business vocabularies and business systems and how tables are laid out in your databases and ERP systems, you can certainly represent that in Semaphore. Being a platform, I always tell people, being a platform means there's 1,000 different use cases, which is good, right? But sometimes it's bad too, right? So you have to hone in on what you're exactly trying to do with Semaphore, the business objective that you're trying to accomplish, and kind of focus there and start there. But doesn't mean there aren't other use cases for the platforms.
Yes. Start with the outcome and then work back to what technology you're going to need to drive it. Interesting. You mentioned SharePoint earlier on. SharePoint is a grave site black hole for much of my documentation. It's kind of why there's the purpose-built API for it, because it's such a ubiquitous use case for kind of Semaphore in customers there.
Yeah, and Microsoft put some, let's just say, constraints in what you can and can't do natively in an API. So we have a fairly tight partnership with them so that we can support SharePoint both on-prem and in the cloud.
Yeah, that's right. And then lastly, somebody was saying, are people seeing business value from their implementations quickly? Obviously, building these knowledge graphs takes time. We just had an emotional footprint report from I believe it was Infotech, where we came out top on that one. Actually, it was literally business value created. I think it was 93% of respondents responded yes, absolutely. The business value there, and in that report it goes through many of the reasons kind of why. It's that ease of data integration, ease of customization, the usability and intuitiveness, the quality of the features, all of which Semaphore scored very highly. I think first in all of those categories. And it's one thing we pride ourselves on, is that usability and interpretability of the kind of the language in your business and kind of expressing that against the data. It's one of the reasons why it's so important with our customers with AI at the moment, because that's exactly what they're looking for, is that contextualized, connected data that the LLMs are really good at if they get it, but often it's behind those proprietary firewalls. So, But gentlemen, we're running well over now. Thank you very much for everybody who stayed on the recording. Thank you again, Stephen and Jim, for putting this together, the team for supporting this. If you've got further questions, if you want to know more information about Semaphore, please do reach out. I believe there's some email addresses for you to contact Jim and Steve on these recordings. But gentlemen, once again, thank you for your efforts, and I'm sure we can do this again in the future. It seems like these things are a popular topic at the moment. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you.